Okay, great. All right, well, welcome everyone to the Fire Management Virtual Cafe. Today's May 6th, 2024, and I'm going to quickly send it over to Philippe Cohen, but I'm Rhonda Struminger, the president of OBFS, and I'm really excited about these virtual cafes. We're trying to do about 4 every year, and it really gives an opportunity. I know it's one more Zoom meeting for many people, but it's also an opportunity to really kind of sit back and have a conversation about some topics that are relevant to us in all of our corners of the world. So Philippe had this idea to do a virtual cafe on fire management, and we loved it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Philippe Cohen.
Well, first of all, welcome to you, and I really appreciate your willingness to participate in this, especially those of you at the far eastern end like John, where the time has got to be somewhat inconvenient. But I think this might be one of the best internationally represented virtual cafes yet, and I'm really excited to have us move forward. The way I'd like to do this is, as each of you present, be sure to describe who you are and just a little bit about your field station, and you can share your screen if you have slides, and try to keep your presentation to about 10 minutes, so that then afterwards we can have questions that can be directed at individual field stations or to the entire panel. So if there aren't any further questions, I think we'll start with John at Palais. So John, the screen is yours.
All right, thank you, Philippe. Going to sorry, just let me. There we go. And all right, so are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks very much for inviting me to participate in this in this virtual cafe. This is our field station. Thanks to Philippe for the photo and for the visit that made it possible. We're very proud to be on your network. And must say I really liked the presentation and the format. Congratulations to everybody at OBFS for that. We're located in northern Greece, which is just shortly or just a little bit below the border with Albania. So you can see the picture there. We're in the Pindos mountain range at about just under 1,000 meters. And Pindos is a very dramatic range of mountains in our area, which is called Zagori. It was made a UNESCO Geopark in 2010. We have an impressive fauna, an impressive flora, and it's a very culturally diverse place in the sense that this isn't a wilderness like a lot of places ecologists and conservationists are interested in. This is has been a working landscape, as we call it, a cultural landscape for thousands of years. So this is a place that people, anthropologists, folklorists, and historians will be happy to visit, as well as geologists and ecologists. We're proud of our work with teaching students field ecology and stuff to do with the environment for the 10 years we've been in operation, and of our summer schools that we've run at the station, and of course for the continuing research that we're involved in. And indeed, we've written a book about the station and about our activities for the station, which is just about to come out. Philippe has written kindly a chapter for us, and we're very pleased with that. The university administration was very slow to accept the station. We've had a lot of political problems with the university administration this year. It's been quite a, how would I put it, reluctant administration to accept us, even though we now have people who would like to become sponsors of the station. So it's ironic that this has happened. But anyway, things are looking better, and we think this book will help. Now, what people are interested in, what this virtual cafe is interested in, is issues to do with fire. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the story of fire very shortly, about the story of fire in Europe and Greece, and then even shorter about our own experience and measures, such as they are. The station, okay, so what's been happening in the last few decades is that the climate has been getting warmer, and this pushes up the pressure to start fires. But also another thing's been happening is we have rural depopulation. Namely, most of the people who live in the area are moving away and moving to the cities or the towns. This is a problem all over Europe, and it's been a problem since the Second World War, and maybe even before that. What this means is that we have less livestock grazing. So that means that there's more forestry generation. Natural reforestation, and that means there's more fuel for possible fires that might start. Another thing that's been happening is that there's more tourism. That'll work in the opposite direction, of course, as there'll be more concern about the area to stop fires. You can see I've added my I put a red box. These are two pictures, one from 2014, one from this year on Google Maps, and the one on the left, 2014. I have a red box around the station in both of them, and you'll see that there's been the forest to our right, to the right of the photo, has become much more lush in the photo on the right, and that's a characteristic of the area generally. Deforestation isn't a problem here, it's reforestation that causes us problems. The most recent major fire was in August 2000, August 2000, over 20 years ago. When 160 hectares were burnt, approximately in that area with the yellow circle, inside the yellow circle, which is only a mile or two from the station. But the fire didn't come towards the station. Well, it wasn't the station then at the time. I take my students for a walk every year through the area that was burned. So you see those dead trees were burned during that fire in August 2000. In Europe, generally, the main emphasis is that there's a warming climate, there's increasing fuel for fires. I've actually participated in some scientific research on this. But there are some other authors have identified reductions in Europe, an overall reduction in the areas burned as a function of time in Europe. To this they attribute to improved management and concern about fire management. I guess it's difficult to find statistical significance in most of these results, but it does show that there are conflicting forces at work in Europe. This picture is a picture of the area burned every year in Greece by fires ever since 1980, coming up to last year. And what you will see is that in some ways, the year 2000, the blue bars and the red bars represent two different databases, which have somewhat different properties, but they have quite a lot of agreement. But the blue bars end in 2016 and the red bars begin in 2000. So the two of them were put together to give a longer time series. You could say that on average, maybe the area burned is greater prior to 2000 and smaller after 2000. But you could argue about that, and for sure what is apparent is that there's a cycle, which is that you have quite a few years with no fires or relatively small numbers of fires, punctuated by years where you have very strong, very intense fire activity. Those are, for example, the year 2000, the year 2007, and the year 2021. So you can see this perhaps as the fire is burning up their fuel, and then the fuel accumulating over the years, and then until there's another critical point reached. But in any case, from that sort of perspective, you could say that there's a force for greater fire potential, higher temperatures, more fuel, and there's a countervailing force that there's greater management efforts. And perhaps this will lead to fewer but larger fires. Certainly a greater variance. And some people say there's a reduced average area burned. Now, our station one of my colleagues on the board was telling me that our station really, we don't have to worry too much about fire because there isn't much wind in our area of the Pindos Mountains. But when I went actually and looked at what the fire intensity, the fire frequencies and so on are as a function of position in Greece, I didn't find much reassurance. The Palais seems to be situated in an area which is pretty active in terms of the danger of fires. So we need to think about this. Now, okay, this is what David and Rhonda sent as talking points. Really, the policies, I would have said that we had no policies and that the university had no interest in the subject, but this all changed about a month ago when some of the student dormitories were burned to the ground in a fire. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but the administration has been rattled. So they've come around asking everybody about what our opinion of what we're doing about fire risk is. So basically, up to now, what we've been doing is buying more fire extinguishers and making sure that our lawn area, which separates us from the forest, is kept relatively clear. In the area overall, there isn't much thought about fire, reducing risks of fire. We don't have, Palais Station does not have land does not have, we sit on a hectare of land or less, and that's it. We don't have control of relative or responsibility for large areas of land. We're in the village or close to the village, so we come under the sort of municipal headings. The station has not been in existence for long enough for us to be able to answer question 4, say, what does not work, because so far we haven't had any fires, but that can be considered as good luck. So that's really as much as I want to say to you about what we've been doing about fire and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I guess if we're going to go, is Impala by chance present? If not, then why don't we go with Archibald, Joshua Daskin?
Sure thing. I will get my slides up and here we go. I am going to speak about fire management at our station, Archibald. We're located here in Central Florida in the United States, in the southeast corner of the US. And we have 2 main properties, which are the red ones here in the south of the outlined area. We call them Archibald Biological Station and Buck Island Reserve. They total about 20,000 acres. And the one on the west side there is primarily Florida scrub habitat along with wetlands and grasslands. Florida scrub is a shrubland ecosystem dominated by clonal oaks and is endemic to Central Florida. And then the more eastern property is a working cattle ranch where our agroecology research happens. We do work throughout the Everglades headwaters, which is the darker outlined tan region here. We also have a strong focus on this lighter area, the Lake Wales Ridge, which is an ancient raised sand ridge home to many endemic species because of its history of being above sea level when sea level was higher. We have 4 big pillars into which we bucket our work: saving the rarest of the rare species and ecosystems, which is mainly about those endemics on the Lake Wales Ridge; sustaining grasslands, which refers to both working grasslands on ranches like our own Buck Island Ranch that provide lots of biodiversity ecosystem services in the area; addressing climate change, which is linked to our over 80 years of data in the region, being able to track trends in climate and develop solutions and build models of climate change; and then connecting large landscapes and wildlife corridors at all scales, from locally right around our 20,000 acres to conserve biodiversity and allow fire management more easily in our area around Archibald, but also up to statewide wildlife corridors and beyond.
Hi, Joshua. Just a quick interruption. Sorry, we're seeing all of your slides. I don't know if you want to do presentation view. So we
okay. Sorry about
seeing
that.
all
Let's see
your
if I can switch.
slide layout
Letting me
without
know.
messing you up.
Let me try to unshare and reshare. Someone had to be that guy today.
Oh, we just want to make sure you're showing us what you want to show us.
How about that? Is that better?
We still see your notes, your next slide. Maybe just go into presentation view. I don't know.
There we go. Is that better?
Still looks the same to me, so just continue.
All right, I'm just going to go for it.
Yep.
I did click switch presentation and notes mode, but I'm not sure what's going on. So apologies for that. Here in the southeastern US, just about all ecosystems historically burned naturally. But because of habitat fragmentation and fire suppression, to protect people's homes and properties, and because of roads that are built, wildfires no longer spread as they used to following lightning storms. So that means there's a strong requirement for prescribed burns to maintain all of these values in the bottom right. ecosystem processes, habitat structure, reducing fuel loads to avoid intense wildfires, and to provide research opportunities on the benefits of wildfire in our ecosystems. Just to give one example of that, this here is a Florida scrub jay, and that's the only endemic bird found in Florida. And we have about a 50+ year study of the demography of the species at Archbold. So we've worked out, among other things, that the species really requires very specific fire return intervals of between 4 and 10 years, or I should say 3 and 10 years, to reset their habitat. They will not nest if the habitat gets too overgrown with tall, thick oaks where they can't see predators, or if it's too low where there's no structure for them to nest in. We also have long-term studies, decades long, on many endemic, rare, and endangered plants and their demography. As I sort of alluded to, most of the habitat on that Lake Wales Ridge, which is 110 miles long and about 5 to 10 miles wide, has been disturbed or even developed over. So the historical extent in green here shows where the scrub and sandhill habitat was pre-European settlement. And on the right is the 2006 version. So today we're down to less than 15% of Florida scrub habitat. And that means that it's increasingly important to manage those areas with fire to keep them in a relatively natural state with those habitats reset through periodic fire-based disturbances. At Archbold, we have a long-term fire management plan, which was initially written down in 1997, although we've been doing controlled burns on the property since 1977. So these maps show the 2024 version of this plan, where we have on the left, the last time each of our 80+ burn units was burned. In the center, we have the assigned fire return interval. So each burn unit is assigned to one of 5 fire return intervals, depending on the exact type of scrub or wetland or grassland habitat that's found there. And those return intervals vary from as little as every 1 to 2 years for some of our grassland habitats to as long as 60 or even 100 years for some of our rosemary scrub, which has naturally got large open patches of sand that don't burn very well. Or those longest 60 to 100, we actually keep a few areas as reference habitat for what unburned locations look like, and for certain species that actually prefer that really thick habitat, like black bears. Each winter, our land manager looks at this map of fire return intervals and fire history and comes up with a due or overdue map so that we can plan in conjunction with our researchers which areas should be burned for habitat management and for science. We have a fairly intensive monitoring program. At the sort of lower end of monitoring intensity, we have hundreds of photo points that we visit on a recurring basis. So this is one location over time. And you can see there was a fire in 1994 that reset the foreground vegetation, and then it recovers over time. Then there was another fire in 2010 that resets the vegetation. So this gives you one set of an idea of what our scrub habitat looks like being burned over time. More intensively, we actually fly a drone over every one of our burns in order to map severity. So we take aerial imagery and then currently use manual mapping of 4 levels of severity that range from 0, which is not burned, up to 3, which is a complete burn of 5 meter by 5 meter grid cells. So we have this for every burn going back to the mid-1980s. And we would love it if anybody on the call is interested in helping us develop an automated version of how to do these sorts of classifications to save us lots of time clicking and digitizing those aerial images, something we're starting to work on. We have, I'm going to show 2 more slides with kind of very preliminary data of some of the analyses I've been doing of our fire data. Between 1967 and 2021, we have had 423 burns, about 3/4 of those prescribed burns, and about 100 wildfires. And we have just over 8 burns per year, although that's gone up to about 12 per year since 2000. At present, we're burning about 1,100 acres or 450 hectares per year. We do most of that burning in-house with our own prescribed fire teams, though we do get some assistance from the Nature Conservancy. We also assist burns in the local region around us for state agencies that are burning public lands. As I mentioned, we have these intensity maps And so we can look at the intensity over time. This on the left-hand side shows our scrub habitat, and on the right shows our restoration property, which is mostly grassland and wetlands. And you can see that the intensities tend to be higher in that scrub area than in our grasslands and pastures. Just one more very preliminary analysis looking at the impacts of drought on the intensity of fires, again on the scrub property and in the pasture and grassland property on the right, and prescribed fires in the pink and wildfires in the black. So wildfires tend to be more intense than prescribed fires, although we have had very, very few of them on the reserve, the grassland site. And as the drought index, the dryness of a year goes up, we do see more wildfires and slightly more intense wildfires, with that signal somewhat dampened for the prescribed fires. Going forwards, we are fortunate to be receiving over $1 million in federal grants starting probably in the next couple of months to fund 3 years of a new fire management team that will be based at Archbold and burning on our site, but also providing regional prescribed fire management support to federal, state, and local agencies and a small number of private landowners to get more fire on the ground. So they'll be providing staffing and vehicles to support burns in these habitats. This is in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Defense, as well as the Department of the Interior, and is tied to climate resilience around a large military installation, Avon Park Air Force Range, which is in the Everglades headwaters and about an hour's drive north of Archbold. The base is really interested in wildfire and climate resilience because the risk of wildfire risks reducing the number of days that they can have operational military activities or actually bombing. And it also increases risk to surrounding communities, which is a public relations difficulty for them. So we're hopeful that the new team will be able to increase both our capacity at Archbold and throughout the landscape for habitat management, community relations, and climate resilience for people and nature. And I will leave it there. Thank you all very much, and apologize for the difficulties with the slides, but I think hopefully did the job.
Thanks, Joshua. That was great. As I suspected, Archbold probably has one of the longest histories of working with fire that I know of at a field station, and you really brought that home. Thank you. How about if we go with Robin and Iracombe next? Are you there, Robin?
I'm here, yes. I'm sorry, I can't. Are you? Is everybody hearing me? Okay.
Yes, we
Okay,
can hear
great.
you.
Okay. Sorry, I do not have a presentation for you. Iracombe is a small private research station situated in the Atlantic forest of Brazil. The Atlantic forest, for people who don't know Brazil, is a completely different biome from the Amazon, much more diverse, but much more severely threatened. There is only less than 10% of the original Atlantic rainforest still left, whereas the Amazon has maintained a much more significant proportion of the country. It happens to be the area with the densest parts of the population of Brazil, and also contains 3 of the cities which are Brazil's biggest cities, and therefore that's why the forest has been so badly devastated, because of the population pressures. We, however, live right in the middle of the forest, and we are surrounded. Our small research station, we have about 20 people working here, or less than that, is surrounded entirely by forest and farmland. The farmland is the properties of small individual family farms. Previously, until about 10 years ago, the major threat from fire in our area was from people chopping down the forest to enlarge their farms. And this has been the main cause of deforestation in our area, has been the demand for more farmland. And as the years went by and farming over the world, I would say, got progressively less and less profitable, people's answer was to increase the size of their holdings at the expense of the forest. So the forest got less and less, the farm size didn't get bigger, but the area under cultivation or under pasture got bigger, and the forest was continually being threatened. However, like the situation in Greece now, there's we have a rural exodus. People are leaving the rural areas and moving into the cities, but we also have a reverse flow of people moving from the cities to seek rural ideals in the countryside. These are different kinds of people with different ideas, but will bring different solutions to the thing. So being as we are entirely surrounded by forest has the big problem, and being surrounded by small-scale farmers, the other problem is that it's not just one or two people around us who are our buffer zone, as it were, from the fires, but there are 20 people around us, and they're all neighbors of ours, and all either cause of fires or susceptible to fires. And so having a kind of strategy does involve very significantly the local community. This is where we, I should also point out, which is pretty obvious, that with, as in the other presentations you've seen, global warming obviously has had a major impact. And in the last 10 years at least, we used to have an average rainfall of about 1,200 millimeters a year. It's probably down to 1,000 and dropping. And we never used to have any period of the year with more than about 20, 25 days without rain, even in the driest part of the year. But now we have up to 30 or even more than that. So we have then a drying out of the area with prolonged dry periods, which we didn't have before. And at the same time, a large increase in the amount of eucalyptus plantations around our center. Eucalyptus is, as you know, not native to Brazil, but it's not a forest, it's a crop. And unfortunately for us, it is something that burns very easily. And once it catches fire, you don't put it out very easily. There's a lot of oils in it that burn very easily, and the wood burns very easily. That's the reason actually why many people plant it as a firewood. But if your eucalyptus plantation catches fire, then you really have severe problems. And we are got on 2 or 3 sides of us, there are eucalyptus plantations owned by different people, which makes it more difficult to control. So we have been trying to involve the local community in. Oh, by the way, I should also point out that since we are in a very isolated area, we cannot really depend on any public service, public fire service or anything, because first of all, our nearest village, which is 14 kilometers away, doesn't have one, any fire brigade. And secondly, even if it did, by the time the telephone doesn't work around here either, by the time we'd run over there and call them and all the rest of it, it would be too late. So basically, we are on our own in this situation. We cannot rely on any public service to come and help us. So that means we have to try and mobilize the community as best we can. We had a serious fire about 3 years ago, which was a real eye-opener for us. And now we are more careful in maintaining a fire break around as much of the property as we can, but unfortunately it's not really possible around all of it because of the topography. We're in a very hilly area, and the fact that that would involve cutting down native forest in order to make a fire brigade, so break, so we can't really do that. So, but we have laid in a stock of equipment for firefighting, basic equipment, because that's all we can do really. Because of the topography and the lack of access, it's very difficult to get any kind of fire extinguishing equipment up there. Everything has to be carried by hand. You can't drive fire trucks up into the mountains and then around the forest because there aren't any trails to do that. So we're talking about basically beating fires out by hand, which is, you can imagine, is very, very tiring if you've ever tried to do it. But that's what the basic tool that we have. base fire beaters, and we are trying to get our local communities to work together. We are enlisting the help of the nearest fire brigade, which is 40 kilometers away, to come and give us a training on fire management and what to do, how to fire control. We actually had last year, there is a public service that trains rural people in whatever things they need. We invited them to give us a talk on fire management, but they told us how to put the fire out in our house, which is not really the problem that we're talking about at all. And spent a long time telling us, where to put the chimneys and that kind of thing. That doesn't really meet our need at all. So what we're doing now is we're trying to get the local fire people from the place 40 kilometers away to see if they can come and set up a proper training course for local people to show us how to manage the fire. So a strategy for fire control is basically that. That's really the what we need to do is to train more people and get more people aware of it. In terms of what strategies have not worked, well, we haven't really had any strategies in the past to compare with what worked, but one that obviously is not going to work is trying to rely upon the public services, because that is totally impractical. The other thing that what we have in the past, basically it's been every man for themselves. That obviously isn't going to work anymore. And as global warming intensifies, fire risk intensifies, we have to do more and more to get the community to understand that we're all in this together, and this is really what we need to do. So basically, that's our situation. You may wonder why I'm even talking to you about this, but really, I came here to learn from you, because your experience is extremely interesting for us to know, to show us what we can do better. I'm sorry that we are not yet in a position to be able to show you what we can do that make your life better. Thank you.
You're not alone, I can assure you. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this. Thank you. I appreciate the presentation and the clarity, given that you didn't use any slides. How about Kesnell River Research Center? Could you present next?
Yeah, hi, it's Ellen Pettigrew here with Phil Owens. We're both research chairs in landscape ecology, and we based out of the University of Northern British Columbia. But our field station associated with the program is the Quesnel River Research Center. And Phil has got some experience working on fires in the province of BC, so he's going to present this presentation for the situations that we've come across in the central British Columbia area. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Ellen. And I'm just going to check that everyone can see my screen. Great.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. I'm just going to, how am I going to advance this?
Just turn this forward. Oh, no.
Okay. So we just got a little bit of just trying to move it forward. I don't know why it's, oh, there we are. Okay, sorry about that, just a bit of a delay at this end. So I'm going to talk about, as Ellen said, we had a big wildfire season in 2017, and it actually affected our field station. So a little bit of experience. Thankfully, it didn't burn down, but it's getting a little close. So just some geographic information. The field station's in British Columbia. Those of you that might not be familiar with North America and Canada. So it's roughly in the middle, about sort of halfway up, third way up the province of British Columbia. You can see a red star there. If we zoom in a little bit more, you can sort of see the watershed that the field station does most of its work in. The Quesnel watershed is outlined in yellow. The little dot you see in the middle, hopefully, of that slide, I'll see if I can show you there, is where the field station is. There's a very small town there, a community called Likely, which has about 300 people. One of the reasons that the field station is there is that it used to be a Department of Fisheries and Oceans hatchery. There's a really big lake there that you can see, Quesnel Lake, which is one of the deepest lakes in North America and the world. It's about 550 meters deep. So the university took it over about 20 years ago to turn it into a field station. We're about 3 hours drive south from UNBC, so University of Northern British Columbia's main campus, which is in the city of Prince George, and we're about 6 hours or so away from Vancouver, so it's quite remote. And our nearest sort of big community, which is just in the sort of scale bar at the bottom, is that you might see a little lake there, is a community called Williams Lake, which is about an hour's drive away. So that gives you some context for where it's located, and also the fact that it's quite remote. You know, it's an hour's drive from a community of about 10,000 people. The field station itself, as I mentioned, used to be a hatchery owned by the federal government, and then the University of Northern British Columbia took it over about 20 years ago. We have labs, we have outdoor flumes. We mainly focus on aquatic research in this watershed, which is about 11,000 or so square kilometers. It flows into the Fraser River. It's really important for salmon, and we have a pretty large population of grizzly bears and everything else you expect to find. But one of the things I do want to draw your attention to with a photograph of the field station on the left-hand side is we are surrounded by forest. So that's a bit of a issue. It's both a blessing, but in recent years, it's also become a bit of a concern. But we do have good access to water. You can see we've got the Quesnel River flows right by the field station. So that's a good thing. We have access to water, but we also have a really large and dense forest that surrounds the field station, which in itself is pretty remote. So 2017 was a pretty interesting year. It was the biggest wildfire year in the province of British Columbia since about 2003. Of course, now that's been matched and even surpassed, but there were over 1,000 individual fires in the province. The burnt area in the province was about 1.2 million hectares. You can see a map there that shows in red the individual spot fires, and then you can see the bigger fires with the red outline, and just those colors of the sort of orange and yellow just showed where there was evacuation orders, and about 65,000 people were evacuated in the province. A lot of them went to Prince George, because we were the sort of one of the local hubs just up here. That's where the main campus of the university is based. But the important thing is the field station is over here, right sort of in the middle of the map. And as you can see, most of the big fires that year were just to the west of the field station. So they were really close. And a lot of the smoke, because we have a lot of westerly winds coming from the west, the Pacific, we had a lot of smoke over the field station. And certainly the Williams Lake area was one of the main areas affected by the fire. And here you can see the Williams Lake Airport. That's how close the fires were getting to both the community of Williams Lake and also to our field station. So it was very much a real issue. So because of the fact that the field station is remote and has limited road access, even though the fires were not within kilometers, they were perhaps 10 kilometers or so away, the university decided that because of road access, they wanted to evacuate the field station. And we have, maybe in the middle of summer, 20 or so staff and students based there. So they were evacuated, told to, relocate back to the Prince George campus, which is up here. But one of the main things was obviously that was done pretty quickly. So people left almost immediately, but we had important equipment and data and computers, and of course, being a field station, from our perspective, samples that we wanted to sort of get before, just in case the field station did actually burn down. One of the problems is that the main highway and our access route to the field station was actually closed. So from Prince George, we would actually go south, and then we would go to Williams Lake and then come up this road to the field station. The field station's in the Red Star, but the province closed the main highway at this location here in blue, which means that basically we couldn't use our normal route. So we had to find an alternative route to get to our field station, which was to go through basically the back roads, which was a little problematic in itself. And we used a couple of trucks to basically go in and get important computers, field samples, things like that. So that was one of the biggest problems we had, is that basically the field station was evacuated and our main access route was closed. So we had to find an alternative. So in terms of a couple of lessons learned from that 2017 incident, one was we collected field samples, computers that had data on, being typical scientists. But one of the things we did do is we left a lot of our instrumentation behind, trucks, boats, all the rest of it, with the idea that the university insurance would cover it. So perhaps one of the lessons to think about is this the case? If you have a wildfire that burns down a field station, would the university or whoever is the sort of one-up for the field station, would they have the insurance to cover that incident? And in the case of UNBC, I'm not entirely sure that that's the case. You know, they make it sound good, but when it comes down to the push, I get the sense that they probably wouldn't cover most of the issues that were burned. We did take photographic and video inventory of everything that we had there in case it burnt down. So we had a record of what was there if it did come to an insurance issue. And also so we knew that what might be lost. Unlike the situation in Brazil, we do have a local volunteer fire department that is in the community of Likely, so 5 kilometers away. Our manager is now part of that volunteer fire service. So he has access to the sort of infrastructure and information that they would now have. Because we're an aquatic field station that used to be a fish hatchery, we have a lot of access to groundwater pumps and generators and all the rest of it. We could deal with small fires, but there's no way we could deal with a landscape level wildfire. So we're not prepared really to deal with something of a catastrophic nature that we've had in recent years in some parts of the province. We have tried to remove some trees close to buildings and consider other fire smart options in terms of sort of the building materials, things like that. We have come up and developed an annual safety and risk assessment plan, which includes things like education and training for students and visitors, and particularly things like excavation routes, recognizing that that's often a key thing. Often a field station like ours might be closed, not because of the fact that it's going to burn down, but because of the fact that the access routes are being compromised. And that's what the university did for us. And then now what we do is we insist that the students and staff at the field station monitor the BC Wildfire Service website, basically on a daily basis during the fire season, so that they know where there are new fires and they know the situation of those. In many cases, you know, I happened to look a couple of days ago at the BC one, and we've already got 100 new wildfires sort of in the last few days / a week. But most of those are under control or small, so they're not a concern. But, you know, it is important to know when those big ones flare up. And just to say that, you know, in the context of British Columbia, this is just a map of another watershed west of Prince George and the university. And in this case, the orange denotes the 2017 wildfire year, which was pretty bad. Now you can see that almost every year now in British Columbia, we're having new wildfires. So the yellows and the pinks are subsequent years since 2017. And in fact, 2023 was the worst wildfire season in Canadian and BC history. So, you know, these things are now happening on a yearly basis, which means that, you know, we do have to really consider field stations and field work generally in terms of wildfire precautions. But as others have alluded to, particularly Joshua and others, there are amazing research opportunities for field stations to learn about wildfires. And this is just a pointer to remind me to talk about this, that, you know, we do have field projects that are looking at fires in British Columbia and are using the research station as a base in order to look at those wildfires. In this case, it's really from an aquatic perspective, not so much landscape vegetation cover. Okay, thank you very much. That's our presentation.
Thank you. That was a very sobering presentation, actually. So before I go on to Pepperwood, I just want to find out if Impala by chance is present. Anybody from Impala? I don't think so, which is unfortunate. But all right, Pepperwood, are you there?
I don't think so
sounds-
fully. The sound is
Oh, sound of silence. Okay. I know Lisa McKelly, who's the executive director, retired, and I wasn't at all clear to me who was going to present in her place. Okay. Well, given that that they're not present, I'm going to start off with with one question in particular, because as I see the presentations, they sort of bifurcate between those that have used and employed fire as a management and research strategy, and those that are really concerned with mitigation. And on the issue of mitigation, I'm really curious, has anybody actually thought about how they prioritize how they would recover from a fire? And because it seems to me that one of the real conundrums that field stations face is when you do have a fire, how do you manage the resources you have that have been burned to recover in how do you determine what are your priorities in terms of recovery? Because you have some opportunity to influence the trajectory and nature of that recovery. And I'm just wondering if any field stations have given much thought to that. And anyone is welcome to respond.
Well, I'll respond from Brazil. We have never thought about that, and it is obviously about time that we did.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, just off the top of your head, how would you go about deciding what the priorities might be for that kind of recovery?
I haven't been deeply involved in it, but I know we've had discussions at Archbold about which of our assets to include in insurance. As a private field station and a moderately small NGO, we're about 70 staff, give you a picture of what we're dealing with. We're not attached to any universities, so we're pretty reliant on ourselves for things like insurance. We don't insure the whole campus, and we've decided to insure the areas that are most at risk. And this is not just about fire for us, but also hurricanes in Florida. So our main building has we're extremely fortunate to have inherited 80 something years ago, a building with 1.5 foot thick concrete walls. And so we actually don't insure that, I don't believe. But some of our outlying buildings and our newer infrastructure that's not built the way they built things in the 1930s in the US is where we've placed more of our insurance expenditures. So I think there is, for private organizations, the potential for some triage.
All right, thanks. That's actually interesting to know. I'd be curious to hear from Police and from Canal about how you would think about what you would want to try to either protect or recover if there was a field station. I know that Police, you don't actually own much land, so the building becomes a priority. But in terms of the surrounding landscape, are there things that you think would be really important to try and recover?
I certainly, like you say, we haven't thought about. We also have a very heavy concrete laden building, so we don't worry too much about it burning up. Now, in terms of the surrounding areas, and most of these areas are newly reforested areas that have replaced arable land as people stop cultivating the land. So they are not, so they're of, in terms of ecological value, the value wouldn't normally be considered as very high because they're sort of developing forests that have not developed significant biological communities. That, you know, that they're not hotspots of biodiversity. there are some older forests. We took you to one of them when you came. These are the sacred forests, the sacred groves. Now these have elevated biodiversity content, and these would probably be an area that would warrant protection. But it's interesting that you ask it, because we haven't really given much thought to that up to now.
Has anybody developed formalized mitigation, articulated mitigation plans? I
I mean,
suspect, but I'm curious.
In Greece, these usually consist of the fire service and the networks they produce. I mean, we have fires all the time, and so the fire service is well developed in that sense. However, and in certain parts of Greece, you will see large fire breaks systematically built in forests, so as to prevent fires. That, however, is not the case in our area, where I think people haven't really been thinking along these lines. Because again, the reforestation of our areas happened in the last 3 decades. So people have not been really thinking about fire in a very active way.
The situation at the Quesnel River Research Center is somewhat different in that the forest that surrounds us is interior cedar hemlock, and it's an interior rainforest. It feels like more of a snow forest when you look at the precipitation delivery over the year. But the cedar is really valuable, and so we have a community forest which manages a large area around our field station to do the harvesting, and between them and the First Nations, it's a cooperation for a community forest. So they manage the forest. I'm not certain that they've focused on fire breaks, but the 20 hectares that we're on, one of the unusual situations is that we host in our old aquaculture facilities. We're currently hosting some DFO work on salmon, specifically Chinook eggs and hatching, so that they can supplement the natural stocks. The Fraser River stocks are quite low, and so they're working, putting a lot of money towards maintaining the stocks and through these types of aquaculture. So because there's so much invested in these eggs, we might have the federal government coming in and focusing and helping us with this. But this isn't a long-term activity. We've only been doing this for the last 3 or 4 years. So whether or not we would get fire bombers in because the cost of the eggs is so much, I don't know. We've not, but I mean, this is the kind of thing that we've not talked about, but with this, bringing this up makes it, clear that we should be having these kinds of discussions, because they just assume we're managing the property, they're getting their eggs. But if the place that they rent burns down, there's a big loss. So we have not prioritized, but I would imagine if the fire started, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans would really prioritize that lab that's got the aquaculture in it.
Yeah, actually, that raises a really interesting question, because one of the outcomes of fires a lot of times is really problematic in terms of water quality and watershed dynamics. And I'm just wondering if that has been thought about at any of the field stations.
I was very interested actually in interpreting Philippe's question, because we were talking about the post-fire strategy. Some people were talking about restoring the environment, other people restoring the station. In our case, the station is all made of wood, so there's no question of restoring anything after that, just a pile of ashes. But the restoring of the environment is an interesting problem, because as the climate change is changing the composition of forests, how do you foresee how this is going to go, and what the composition of the forest, if you're planting a new forest now or replanting a burnt forest, are you going to anticipate how it was going to be naturally
in view of the fact that we have this climate change. This is the something that we are actually looking at in not in a post-fire strategy, but as a general planting strategy, reforestation strategy. How do we try and understand or imagine what a forest should look like in view of the changes that are happening in nature?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. And it's one I know that I struggled during my time because in grasslands and shrublands, there was often a real possibility that after fire, you'd get a complete type change. And, and the question becomes, how much do you resist that type change versus trying to recover what was originally there? And also, how feasible is it to prevent invasives from getting a foothold in areas that have been burned? And I'm wondering how field stations think about that, because that's a really big issue.
Yeah, if I may say, it's a sort of an irony in this context that in a way, although it leads into this idea of using fire as a management tool, the problem for us is that there is reforestation. The diversity of the area in which our field station is set is essentially the diversity associated with an open landscape. The ecological communities that have developed have been organisms that depend on open ground. So the dramatically increasing forest cover from an ecological point of view is a big danger. So that in some ways, we would have to consider perhaps the use of fire as a management tool, but that discussion has not taken place in Greece in recent years, to my knowledge, at any serious level.
John Garbish from Cedar Point raises an interesting question, and rather than read it, John, why don't you present it, because I think it's a really, really good point.
Sure. So we're on Western High Plains. As an aside, just northeast of us, a year and a half ago, our 4-H center, it's about 40 acres of wooden buildings. They burned. It is gone. And it's not altogether sure what UNL is going to do. There's private organizations that want to rebuild it and all that. So this has been on my mind. We have found federal funds to do thinning of eastern red cedar around the station. I have been improving various trails so they're wider as fire breaks, and I get quite a bit of pushback when our researchers look at those environments and they're so dramatically changed. It's complicated because we have whole agencies that their whole job is to just remove eastern red cedar. So we didn't remove it all. We actually thinned it to sort of the National Forest Service algorithm of about 40 feet apart, 8 feet up on the sides of the trunks. And so we thought there was eastern red cedar forest in place, but it is thinned back so you could have a low temperature fire that burns through. But my whole question is, have you guys struggled with balancing that? Oh my God, John, you just took out that entire canyon versus, well, we don't have to worry about it going in a big fire.
Any response to that?
Well, we don't have quite the same challenge at Archbold of, mitigating against not so natural, super intense wildfires, but we do have the research versus management trade-off. And for us, the success has been implementing a plan that has stayed pretty stable over time so that researchers can plan their projects and know, well, this is probably going to burn in the next 2 or 3 years. So I wonder about giving folks a couple of years of head start before the management that you're trying to do. I'm not sure how helpful that is or isn't.
In truth, that is pretty much how we approach it, is sneak up on it and keeps pointing out the hazards. In some respects, wildfires around us have helped because we get past that issue of, oh, that'll never happen here. It's fine.
Rhonda, you raised a really important issue. Wanna?
I think it was hinted at, I think in the last presentation, this idea of leveraging some of the indigenous knowledge around management strategies, but I don't know what that looks like in practice. I mean, our area in Mexico, there's so much clear cutting. Fire hasn't been a big problem. I mean, there's been controlled fires to clear the forest, to plant the crops. But in terms of thinning or any sort of cyclical habits in the area that have a history, I don't know if there's something to be learned from on that front. I think, Philippe, you mentioned it. You hinted at something in your last slide. There was one line about indigenous mitigation or management strategies.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one is obviously before a fire happens, what options do we have? The slide that I put up was to do with the fact that there had been a really significant fire in the traditional territory of the Skeetchison Indian Band. So they have a very large federally funded project now, looking at how do you rebuild that landscape back, with this idea that you want to make it more resilient. So they have had the fire, but how do you make it more resilient? And then how do you sort of protect important resources, particularly say water resources, things like that. So in this case, they're looking at potentially plants and particularly trees that would be appropriate for fire that is going to come in the future again, but also ones that are meaningful to them. So the province of BC is shifting quite a lot, has been shifting quite a lot over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years towards bringing in First Nations to have a voice at the table a lot more than they previously did in terms of how to manage landscapes. And the timing is such that with so many wildfires now, they have a lot of lessons that they can impart to us about how they have managed the landscape before. And one of the things that we haven't really done around our field station, but it has been mentioned by several people, including Philippe, is this idea of prescribed burning. They have traditionally done it a lot in their territories to control for fires. And of course, in the landscapes that are less managed by traditional people, shall I say, the management of forests has not been very good at all. And that's one of the reasons we're in this mess, is because we've had a long period of fire suppression. So we have all this dead fuel, dead wood and fuel in the landscape. And I think that's one of the reasons we're having so many problems now in BC. So I think there is a real big shift in the province towards getting First Nations to sort of manage landscapes for a variety of reasons, of which now what protecting for wildfire is, or big severe wildfire is one of the things that they're trying to move towards. So I think it's there's lots of lessons that we can learn there for sure.
Yeah, I have to, the cynic in me thinks this is great. We're asking First Nations to come in and manage landscapes we've messed up. So there's a sort of exporting of responsibility there that can be a little problematic. But I think that that's a really important issue, and I think we have to think really strategically about that. One thing that occurs to me as you're speaking is field stations often have long-term research projects and program activities that can be severely compromised by wildfires. And I'm just wondering if there's ever any thought about how you don't so much mitigate the damage that the fire might do, but think in terms of how the program or project can adapt to that eventuality so that you don't lose a lot of the long-term research value. Jorge, please jump in.
Well, actually, it was a question that I was gonna pose to everyone related to that question. So, um, like here we're trying to do at Jasper Ridge, we added firewall pile burns last year. I'm sorry, just last March. It feels like last year. And we're starting, we have now 145 acres that we assessed. Some were treated, different methods. But I'm wondering how all the other field stations, how much of your research projects inform adaptive management, the next areas that you're gonna treat with fire or not, or with other treatments? Do you build specific projects to inform that? Do you look for specific, like, oh, soil moisture's reached this, grass cover got to this threshold? Or do you sort of just by memory remember that you have to do it in some areas? Yeah, it's a broad question, but yeah, I guess it's related to the long-term research question.
Archbold ought to weigh in on that one.
Yeah, I can try. And I'll try to do your question, Philippe, as well, about kind of planning for catastrophes, because we've had some wildfires in recent years. On the kind of how do you track what needs to be burned, I would recommend, I don't know, Jorge, if your field station has a kind of a land estate, a large area that you're managing, or if you're working on public lands around you. If it's land that you own and can manage yourselves, yeah, then I would try to divide it into management units, and make a plan for what you need to manage in which ways and which years. I would say we struggle doing that for invasive plant management at Archbold, but we've gotten really good at it for fire. And it comes down to understanding the vegetation types and what the natural fire return intervals was. But again, we're doing this really for maintaining a historical fire regime, not for mitigating wildfire damage, because we work in a place that's supposed to burn. We have put in some of those monitoring efforts that I mentioned, very fine resolution, 5-meter scale, but you could also do it at the unit scale. Like, when was the last time it burned, or how much fuel has it accumulated, and what is the risk, and how close is it to a building? What direction does the wind usually blow? All of those kinds of things actually really matter. And then to Philippe's question about preparing for research infrastructure problems, we have an online map on everybody's phone that it has all of the research infrastructure on our 20,000 acres. So it's where our weather stations are, and our game cameras, remote triggered cameras, and eddy flux towers measuring the carbon. So our land manager knows when he goes out to do a prescribed burn, oh, I have to go tell researchers A, B, and C that I'm going to be burning. The day before, they've got to go get their infrastructure, or sometimes we wet down an area around it and avoid burning it up. So I would recommend those sorts of kind of crowdsourced what's where on your field station, because at least in our case, and I know other places as well, you get to have a lot of stuff out there, and it's hard to keep it all in your head as far as what the risks are and what you need to burn around, or go and scramble and pull away if there's an advancing wildfire. We've had to do both of those.
John, you have your hand raised. Yeah.
Yes, I have two questions. One is a short question, anyway, and the other is a little bit longer. The short one is, I mean, we talked a little bit about fire breaks. Is there a characteristic size that these should be? And the second one is the issue of controlled burning. Is that something that was controversial when it was first introduced in places like Florida? And is it likely to be, because it seems to me, as I mentioned earlier, something that should be thought of in a lot of Mediterranean type environments?
Could you say the first half of your question again? I got the part about controversy. What was the first half?
Yeah, it was just how big should fire breaks
Oh,
be to be
in our case, we aim
disposable?
for 2 to 2.5 times the length of the anticipated maximum flame size. That's not going to work out west where you're getting 200-foot flames. But we get, if we get a 20-foot flame, it's huge. So we're usually dealing with 2 to 10-foot flames. And then in our case, we're lucky we work in a place that has a long history of fire on the landscape, both naturally and in working landscapes. So we're surrounded by a lot of cattle ranches, some and increasing housing developments, but a lot of the long-term residents are comfortable with fire. So I won't say we never have problems, and I won't say that it's not increasing slowly, but in our case, we live in a place that people are used to burns. Some of the public lands are definitely having problems to our north, where there's more and more residential development, and we get a lot of recent retirees moving to the area who are not used to the culture of fire. So there have been increasing suggestions for public outreach campaigns, things like door-to-door postcards, what is the importance of fire and why does a prescribed burn protect your property in the case of a wildfire? So I think working with community partners, whether it's local government or a planning agency, potentially even insurance companies, to message the importance of prescribed fire can be successful.
That actually raises a really important issue, which is what are the successful strategies for engaging communities? I know, Irakambi, you've been talking about how you're trying to train communities to fight fires, but I think how to best engage surrounding communities is a really big and important issue when it comes to fire, whether you use it as a management tool or as something you want to mitigate and prepare for.
Just like to comment at that point that in our part of the world, controlled burns are illegal. So that strategy would not work at all with us.
Wow. How are you going about engaging the community around the issue of fire at Irakambi?
Well, the best and the most effective way of getting the community involved is when the fire comes, go around, call out everybody to come and help. And then the next day say, listen, guys, we got to be ready for this next time around. But that's really what the strategy has been. That works. But of course, it's not necessarily lead to the best planning, but it does work.
That was sort of where I was going with the question I posted in the chat was, and Robin, I don't know if you know what the training looks like with the community. You said about 40 kilometers away, there's a fire brigade and they might offer training to the community, but I would think they would want some controlled burns. Maybe there's an opportunity there to work with them, but I am curious what the training might look like.
Well, it's fairly basic, but since these guys are quite used to the kind of situations we have when you have a forest fire, and everybody's running for their lives trying to figure out what to do, what the secret really is getting organized and getting things more systematic, and not just everybody trying to beat out the nearest flames. And so the training is basically that kind of training. What kind of things you need to think about, what things and groups of people could do, how you're going to, instead of just putting out the nearest flame to you, how are you going to stop the fire spreading? That's basically the way the training works. And that, I think, is pretty effective.
I guess one last question to follow up on that, Robin. Is there anything aerial to get a gauge of the fires when they come, the size, et cetera, that you're up against? A drone?
No.
Okay. Challenges await.
Yeah. All right. Are there any other particular issues or questions that others want to ask before we bring closure to this? Okay, well then, first of all, I just want to say thank you. This is a really big issue. I think that it's a conversation that needs to continue, and I would recommend to those of you who haven't been to the annual meeting to attend and think about talking to colleagues about this, because it's one I'm sorry Pepperwood wasn't here, because I know it's a big issue among California field stations and is going to be one that's going to impact field stations all over the world for many of the years coming up. So any last thoughts before we bring an end to this virtual cafe?
There are a few things I want to add at the very end, Philippe. so-
Okay, then I'll hand it to you.
Well, thank you, Philippe, for pulling this together, and thank you all for joining us today. There is going to be calls for concurrent sessions or for concurrent sessions at the meeting in November in South Carolina. So if we want to continue the conversation there, I strongly encourage anyone at this session to please propose a concurrent session on this topic. We'll also, I've got everyone's emails from when you logged in, so I'll be following up on a few things from the chat as well, just like the link and all of that, Joshua, if you want to send that to me, or, you know, any other details you want me to send to this group, everyone who logged in. But I'll also share the recording on OBFS, on the OBFS YouTube channel. So a way to come revisit anything you might want to review again is through that mechanism. I am going to send out a little form at the end for suggestions for new virtual cafes. So please feel free to come up with other topics you're really hoping to bring a group together to discuss. And if your station has not already done this, please register at the new obfs.org website. It requires a whole new registration. Once you do it, you won't have to keep doing it again, but the old site's information was not carried over. So some of you are not yet there, and it would be great to get the map up to date with your station. And I'm happy to answer any other questions about OBFS or anything while we have the fire management group here. We still have a few minutes.
Thank you all. Good to
Thank
see you.
Yeah, always good to see you. All
Okay.
right.
And I'll stop recording.